Привет! Yay, thank you, thank you. Oh, wow, okay. It's my first time in Russia, so thank you for having me here. How is everyone doing? Having a good conference so far? Yeah? Okay, good. I know it's almost the end of the day, so I'm happy that you're so enthusiastic still. Yeah, the party is almost coming, just one more session after this one, right? So, all right, what I'm going to be talking about is creating airplane mode proof applications. And it's not just going to be for apps, it's not just going to be for Xamarin apps, but it's basically just network things that you have to take into consideration yeah, whenever you have an internet connection, and basically all applications have use an internet connection now, right? So, and when I'm talking about an app or an application, it's not just the physical thing that's on your phone or that's on your desktop, but there's always a server side, especially for apps. And it can be just around the corner, it can be a PC sitting in the corner right there, but of course it can also be a server that's halfway around the world, which is probably more realistic. And in between, a whole lot of things can go wrong and will go wrong. So yeah, we're going to see how you can deal with that. Since I haven't been here before, let me introduce myself a little bit, although it's not about me, but then at least you know who you're looking at. My name is Gerald. Try saying that. Yeah, I'm a software developer from the Netherlands, and I specialize in Azure things, Xamarin things, and yeah, basically just everything that has to do with technology. I'm also a Microsoft MVP, which means I get to do these things a lot, which is awesome, and meet great people. I've been told there's a discussion zone afterwards, so for questions, normally I would say just shout them out and I will try to answer them. But maybe it's best now, also this is a large room, so to keep it for the discussion zone, I will be over there, and I'll be happy to talk to you or answer any questions that you have. Also, I've written a couple of books. I hoped to have my latest one on the right for you with me, but unfortunately I don't have them yet. But I came up with something. I thought I had fun while doing this in my presentation, to add a kind of Hulk Matrushka. And whenever you spot it, just take a picture of me, the session, tweet it at me, and I will be giving away 2 books. So yeah, I don't have them right now, but I will contact you and we'll make it work. I'll just come back to Moscow again and just be here next year. Okay, so on to the cool stuff. Our application doesn't even have to be fast. It's enough that the user thinks that's fast. So a lot of what we're going to see has to do with a bit of user experience. It will not, per definition, make your application faster or better. Well, it will be better, but it has a lot to do with the user thinking that your app is better. And there's a lot of great apps out there, but users have high expectations of apps right now, especially again on mobile applications. Because yeah, I don't know how about you, but I came here and on the airport it's just like, hey, I want to check what the status of my flight is, so boom, I go to the app, 10 seconds, and I know what my flight status is, and I put it back. So in that 10 seconds, your app has to be fast, has to be snappy, has to respond. And if it doesn't, then the user's going to install it, and it's really hard to get back from that. So that's especially true for mobile apps, but also on the desktop, the threshold is a bit higher for users there. But yeah, you have to pay attention to that kind of thing. So let's zoom in on a little bit of the app development. I've heard you like the hardcore coding thing, so I'm just going to go through this quickly and go to code. Why is development for mobile so hard? Well, basically these things. It starts with the already thousands of APIs that you have to know. If you're using Xamarin, are there any mobile developers in here? Okay, really cool, cool. Xamarin as well? Wow, nice. Okay, so then you know there's a lot of stuff out there, and Xamarin makes it easy, but you still have to know what is in these APIs for you to use. And that's a lot of it. And with each new version of the operating system of Android, of iOS, there will be new functions that you can use that you have to be aware of. Then the public APIs, here is basically where the networking stuff comes up. If you're lucky, then the API is in your, you are creating the API yourself as well. So then you have control over the servers and where you can reach it and how it's built. Because if you build it, it's the best, right? But maybe you're using an API that's built by someone else, and then it's mostly crap, right? And so then you have to just deal with how that API responds, and you can't always predict how it will respond. So yeah, you have to take that into account. And then from the API, we go to the backend integrations. That's another point of failure where you have to go through. Maybe something fails there. Then you're depending probably on third-party libraries. There's a lot of good libraries out there, all open source on GitHub, which is really great. So you can inspect them, but yeah, you can consume them, and there can be bugs in them. And please don't just raise issues and shout at people that contribute to that, because they're really doing their best. And of course, if you're talking about mobile applications, then there's still a lot of limitations on the device. I mean, the iPhone that I have in my pocket right now is much more faster than the first PC I ever owned. But still, if you compare it to desktop applications or the power in the cloud, then yeah, there's limitations to memory and what you can do. So always keep that kind of performance things in mind as well. So the network constraints, that is where a lot of pain comes from. Mobile connections are not always stable. I don't know how it is here, but whenever I drive through a tunnel in the Netherlands, then my connection is just gone. So yeah, if I'm then just browsing, I don't know, Facebook, then all of a sudden I can't, because the connection is gone. And if you do not think about this up front, then your app will just crash. Bandwidth costs money. Again, I don't know how it is in Russia, but in the Netherlands, we don't have unlimited data plans. So you pay for, and it's gigabytes, so I can't complain, but you have to pay amounts of money for gigabytes that are coming in, for megabytes that are coming in. And so each request that you do costs money to your user. So think about that. If you, in terms of caching, don't get data whenever you already have it, because it will just cost another more money for data which you already have on your device. This is something that we will see later on. For web applications, there's a really nice site, I think, whatdoesmysitecost.com or something. You can enter the URL and it will load it for you, and it will see and it will show you for each country how much your site will cost the user to load based on how many megabytes are coming in. It's funny and it's shocking as well. So network calls take time. Like I said, the servers can be halfway around the world, so it will take time in whatever case to do a network request and get the data back, and then you have to probably process them and show them and whatever. So here's the 8 fallacies of distributed computing. These are I have it in a little note right here. They're from 1994, but it's still true. This is basically a bunch of assertions. If I would have the perfect network, then it would be this. So the network is reliable. Right. So latency is 0, all that kind of stuff. This is never true, basically. There's an interesting article on Wikipedia. Read it if you want it. But what options do we have for doing this? Because I have this development machine. It's a very expensive, great MacBook that I'm very happy with. And when I started developing mobile applications, then the iOS simulator came up, the Android emulator came up, and I thought it's like an emulator, right? So it simulates and emulates also the limitations that you have on your mobile devices. But it doesn't. So what happens is whenever you load the iOS simulator, it will have 16 gigabytes of RAM, it will have 1 terabyte of disk space, it will have a perfect Wi-Fi connection, and I'm like, what? How am I ever going to test all this real-world stuff? And the same is true for Android, so don't just go out like, yeah, Apple doesn't do it right again. It's Android as well. So how do we still get these same conditions, and how can we still test if something fails, and how do we do that? Well, the emulator and simulator luckily do have options to mimic at least the network connections. I mean, for the memory stuff, I think there is some stuff going on that you can say from the menu, like simulate memory warning or something. But yeah, that doesn't really impose the limits. It just shows the and fires the events. But there are options to mimic the network conditions. So you can say, hey, I want to have a bad connection. And for iOS and also for macOS, you can use the network link conditioner, or actually this is for macOS. I will show it to you in a little bit. And basically what you do is simulate this for your whole network connection. So it also works for whatever other network connection that you might have, so also for the simulator. And you also have this on your physical device. So what you can basically do is just have a bunch of profiles here, and you can also create these profiles yourself. So here you can see 100% loss, which basically means you have a network connection, but all the packages are dropped, so you're not getting any data. 3G, well, and all these kinds of variations that you can create. And also you have these options on the Android emulator. So let's quickly have a look at that. Come on. There we go. For macOS, it installs in the system preferences here. So we have the, hey, don't I have it here? Huh, it's not installed. Well, that is weird. Probably because I installed the new macOS update, something that it got lost. Okay, so it might not work with the latest version of macOS, as we've just learned. But here is the option for the stock Android emulator, which you probably don't want to be using. There are some mobile developers. The Android emulators are meh. But here is options. You can come through it here. It will open this screen, and under settings and proxies, you can set a. This is actually the proxy. There's also some options in here that can mimic also these signal strength and network types and that kind of stuff. So you can emulate some stuff here. And there's probably some other maybe third-party tools out there. Another good emulator for Android is Genie Motion, which also has options for this. So yeah. But then we can mimic. This is come on. Yeah. You got them right. Okay. Okay, so now we can mimic these things that go wrong for the network, but now we want to see what is going over the line, or, well, the wireless. So what's going over the air. And there's other tools for that as well. And you might probably know Charles, which is basically the cross-platform version of Telerik Fiddler. I think that one is more known. And what you can do with these things is you can inspect the packages that are going over your network, or wireless, or whatever. And you can just click on it, and you can see what the contents of your HTTP request is, the request enter response. I heard you like hardcore development stuff. If that is true, then you can use Wireshark, which is really kind of the network things with all kind of details that I don't understand. And you have a very simple tool, which is also, I don't think it's maintained anymore, but I really like it because it's really simple, which is called HTTP Scoop. I actually paid money for this, so I will keep using it as long as I can. And we will see that in a little bit, how we can use that to inspect the actual requests. And that is where you can really see what's going on, what the response times are, and what things are going over the line. This is also very good for inspecting all your JSON objects flying around back and forth to your application and your server. And of course, there's a very powerful, awesome tool that is completely free, and I'm sure everyone has it, and that is the AirPlay mode. So yeah, well, again, okay, very good. I can do this all day. Cool. And yeah, I mean, it's a few years ago, and I built my first application, and I don't know, maybe I was traveling or I was just bored and flipped the airplane mode switch and started an application I had built, and it would just crash. because yeah, I was used to everything being connected, right? And it got the data, and that was awesome. And whenever it couldn't do that, then it would just throw an unhandled exception. And yeah, so that wasn't good. And from that moment on, I was like, okay, maybe I should keep this in mind more. And here I am talking to you about it. Okay, so quickly onto the code. All the code that can be found on this link, which is basically my GitHub. So you might see a pattern. My username Twitter handle thing is basically my username everywhere. So just Google it, you will find it, and I think the slides will be shared afterwards as well. And let's have a look at the basic sample application that I built, which was for the Avengers. It was a while ago when the new movie came out, and of course now there's the sad news that Stan Lee has died. So I don't know, maybe it's a beautiful symbolic sample app now. And the app does a very simple thing. It just has a list of some Avenger members. And yeah, you can click through it, see some information, and click again to see in which comics they appear, which is mocked data from somewhere. Because if you are really into this, Marvel has this huge API with all information about all the superheroes. I learned when I was preparing this talk. So that is really cool. All is built with Xamarin.Forms. With an ASP.NET Core backend. The backend is not very fancy. I'll show you that in a little bit. Actually, why don't I do that now? And it's hosted on my Azure account, so if you want to have a play with this yourself, you can just use the base address there, and don't worry about hosting it yourself. Actually, let's look at the little tool things here. This is Charles, as you've just seen. So here you can see, hopefully there's nothing embarrassing in here. All the HTTP requests that are going on. And of course, if you have tried to do this yourself before, then you will see that you cannot inspect, of course, the SSL things, so the encrypted HTTPS things. You can do it. Here's a pro tip if you want to use that. The thing is SSL proxying. And there are some options here to install it in your iOS simulator and also other stuff. You have to install some kind of root certificate which tampers with your security. So don't do it on real devices that you actually use day to day. And then you can actually see the contents of the HTTPS requests going on here. If you have the option, use HTTP for testing, of course, because it's much easier to do. And here's the HTTP scoop, which is much simpler, and we'll see about that in a little bit. Let's just quickly dive into, for the people who don't know this is a Mac, this is Mac OS, and this is Visual Studio for Mac. Well, I didn't build it, but still thank you, I'll take it. And there's one feature that is really awesome about this Visual Studio for Mac that you can't do with Windows, and that is this. This one. So this is always hard to read on Windows machines, but you can do this on a Mac, so that's cool. So this is just an ASP.NET Core, because yeah, then we can run this stuff on a Mac. And it doesn't do really fancy stuff, it's just controllers. I get the data from this fake database things where you can see it's really fake because it's just hard-coded. I took a few from the Marvel database and put them in here. And also for the comics, I was done copying and pasting, so it was just this. And here are the controllers that will just get this data back, get the whole list, and get the details for a specific one. And here not found. Okay, get any. There should be. That's for the comics. So this is for the superheroes. There's another one for the comics. And whenever I get the ID 2 and it does some random thing, then I trigger an error to show you some error handling later on. So don't be surprised when you get an internal server error, because that is all part of the solution. But nothing fancy going on here. So how does the app work? Well, like I said, it's just a list of people here. So if we go to Spider-Man, we see his little avatar and powers and abilities, and you can see in which comics he appeared. And whenever, so 0 base index, 0, 1, 2, hey. Hey, it's Hulk. Well, that was really coincidental, by the way. So whenever I do this, then there should be an internal server error somewhere coming up. No, it's not this one. 12012. It should be this one, right? Well, anyway, we'll find that out later. So this is the app. It doesn't do really anything more. But that is the basic version. Do I need to go back here? And of course, what you should do, so let's quickly go to the structure of this solution here. If you've worked with Xamarin.Forms before, then you probably notice this is all familiar. This is the shared library, so this is where you want your app to be. This is where you want to write all the code, because if you write it in here, it will be shared across all the platforms. We all know what Xamarin and Xamarin.Forms is, right? If you don't, then leave. Oh, really? You don't? Okay. Well, Xamarin is the solution for writing cross-platform applications based on C# and .NET. That's real short version. And Xamarin.Forms takes away the pain of before you had to do Xamarin and still create native UI things. And with Xamarin.Forms, you have some kind of abstraction layer for that, and you can define your controls also in an abstract manner with XAML, and it will translate to the native controls. So that's really short what Xamarin is. And then you have two projects here. In this case, the iOS and Android. You can also do Windows, you can also do macOS, you can also do GTK and all that kind of stuff. But I just have iOS and Android here. And these are just bootstrapper projects for creating the actual iOS and Android apps. And what it does, this should probably look familiar as well. Just create an HTTP client. I'm actually doing it wrong here. No, I'm doing it right. Oh, good. So because a lot of people do this HTTP client thing in a using statement, because it will be disposed at the end of the request, and then you get pool exhaustion and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of discussion going on right now. I think it's fixed in the newer .NET Core kind of things that you have to use an HTTP client factory. So just create an HTTP client once and use it and reuse it and reuse it. And when you're done, then dispose of it, and don't do it for every request because you'll be in trouble. And what you do then is create methods for get your superheroes and get your comics for the superhero, and you get all this kind of code that looks basically just the same, but does just tiny things different because you have to deserialize to a other object, but the majority of the code is still the same. So what you need to do, I mean, this is already enforced by the .NET framework and that kind of stuff, is use the await async. So that's already a lot of user experience. So the UI won't be blocked whenever your user is getting data, but it will still look responsive, and you don't get the not responding in your title bar of Windows, that kind of stuff. So already use await async. That is a very good thing to use and do things in the background. Anything else worth mentioning here? This is done from a service, so I just get this from a backend service. I have some pages, so this is the XAML stuff I was talking about. This is basically will be translated into a list view for iOS and a list view how it's supposed to look on Android. I will be showing you the iOS one for now. Android will look different but do the same thing. And you can just create your layouts like this. And I'm using the MVVM pattern, so I have page models to back these up. So I have a page model here, which just has the backend service and refresh list command, so it will refresh the superheroes and load them into this list, and through data binding, it will go and show you the things in the XAML page. And of course, some very simple, these were also in the backend, some very simple models to just translate these things into C# objects. This should look pretty familiar. Also, already one thing that's in here is Fody, which is a plugin. I think I have a slide for that later. If you're working with data binding and that kind of stuff, you will have to update the UI from your page model. So new data comes in, and you want to show a new property on screen. So imagine that we have this application and Spider-Man wants to rename himself, or he grew a little bit, and new data comes in and you want to show this on screen, then you have to implement the iNotify property changed. I'm not sure if that's in here, but that will notify, well, basically any object can subscribe to that interface, and whenever new data comes in, the UI will be updated automatically if you use this XAML data binding stuff. Fodi is a library that will also take a lot, that will implement the iNotify property changed properties for you automatically. I think I have something later on about this. So that's basically the basic version of our application. So let's look at some quick wins that we can do here. Things that are already wrong with our application. Wow. One thing, this is kind of Xamarin specific, but also something you need to take into account. There's other libraries and ways of doing this in other applications. There is FF image loading, which is a library which does fast and furious image loading. And it will cache the images. Because what you would see happening now is that the images would come in each time. And yeah, these images aren't going to change very quickly. Imagine that you would have a Facebook-like application. Users' avatars are going to change, but not every 5 minutes. So you can cache them for some time so that it's not loaded with each request. And it also deduplicates similar downloads. So if it sees like, hey, this image I already downloaded before, or I'm going to have to download this. If you, again, Facebook, if you have 3 posts of the same person, it would download his avatar 3 times with this library, or you can take it to account to not do that and just load it once, but show it 3 times. It will also do some error handling, so it will retry some image downloads. Maybe it's not available for some reason the first attempt, and you can retry it a couple of times. And it also has a placeholder for whenever you really can't download the image, or for when the image is loading. You can specify a placeholder image, which should be a local image probably, to show in the meantime. It has some more awesome features. You can do transformations on them. You can do show SVG images, GIF support, always good as well. And well, the loading and error placeholders I already mentioned. And you have to really initialize this library. Like a lot of the Xamarin libraries, you have to write an initialization line. Don't forget that, because else the whole stuff won't work. And also very, very basic. I mean, this is how I could prevent crashing of my first application. The connectivity plugin, it's actually part now of the Xamarin Essentials library, which bundles a whole bunch of plugins into one. And with this, you can just check the connection status. So this is basically a first step. It's not the best for user experience, but what you can do is just start the application, see if there's a connection. No, then you will just say, I'm sorry, there's no connection. I can't do anything, and just stop there. Again, not the best for user experience, because users will be like, well, this is useless. But at least it won't crash, and people will know what's going on. It can also give you some information about what kind of connection the user has. So is it Wi-Fi, is it cellular, or anything else? And it has certain methods to see if a host is reachable. And it also has an event to see whenever the connection state changes. So whenever you switch from online to offline, an event will be raised, and you can try to reload your data whenever you see the connection comes back up. Here we have a refit, which is pretty cool for the redundant code. You just have to write an interface with the endpoints of your API, and it will generate the code at compile time for you. I'll just show you, then it will get clear. And it's not just for Xamarin, you can use it. It's a generic C# .NET plugin. Yeah, you can use it to generate the endpoint code easily. So let's have a look. Oh, I forgot to mention, like I said, everything is on GitHub, and I have put this into releases. which basically just creates tags in the Git repository. So yeah, this is the specific versions, and each time something is added. So here in version 2, you can see the quick wins, FF image loading, cross connectivity, and refit. And if I go into my Git client, I can discard these changes somehow. Just starting to use this client. And I can switch to v2. Yes. And it will reload a couple of things here. So now, this is the refit thing. So you can see this is the same backend service as before, which has the duplicated code with, hey, you have to do this request, you have to do a get, and you have to do it here. And now it's just these one lines. I can just say REST service get superheroes. So maybe you think, okay, he put it into another service, he is over engineering things, but I am not. So there's something not going right with the naming here. I admit that, because this I backend service isn't actually going to be this backend service. So naming-wise, it's not really okay. But forgive me. And this is basically all you have to do now to implement a REST API endpoint. You just have to write this interface, and you have to say here the HTTP verb. So you can say get or post, and you're going to specify where it needs to go without the base address. Pro tip, don't forget the slash here, because else you will run into trouble. So put the slashes in there. And here you're going to say it's all going to be async, so it all has to be tasks. And here you're going to say to what it has to be deserialized to. And then here it will just take a method name that you can call upon. And if you look at this one here, we want to provide a parameter in the URI, because this is going to be a get on base address slash comic slash the superhero that you selected. And with this notation between the brackets, it will know by having the same name here and here that whenever whatever parameter value you put in here, it will put that in the URL that you're trying to call. So this, if I put in 5 in as superhero ID, this will become comic slash 5. And what happens here is whenever I build this now, it's probably going to fail because there was something going on here with this library I have to update, so no one saw this. And whenever I do, then compile time, a class is generated for you that will contain the full implementation of this. So you don't have to write like the HTTP client dot get async from this endpoint, blah, 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 deserialize to blah, blah, blah. It's all done for you by using just this. Review in Finder. So if we go to here, 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 then there's nothing. So trust me, there's a class generated for this. What did we have more? Okay, the FF image loading, and this is pretty Xamarin specific. But if we go to the pages here and to the details page, there should be an image here. So normally you would just use, what I didn't mention by the way for the refit thing, you can arrange everything with these attributes here. So now it's get, but you also have the post one. And you can also specify the endpoint that you can do here, and it will just, you can say on your parameter here, whoops, from body and that kind of stuff. I don't know why the IntelliSense is failing me, it must be the demo gods. And then whenever you put an object in there, it will know that it will have to post it to the endpoint. By using this post attribute instead of a get. So I can just simply do post. There's my IntelliSense. And there's also the, what more do you have? Put and patch and that kind of stuff. So anything you want to do, you can do with this library as well. So then for the images, normally you would use an image like this, but the FF image loading plugin has a cached image. Which uses the same property names as the normal image, but it has much more, like the cache type and the cache duration, which is typically in days, I think. So this will save the cache on disk, so it will be persisted over multiple sessions, and it will be cached for 90 days. What more did I have in this refit? The connectivity plugin, where is that one? I think it should be in here somewhere. Well, never mind. It should be somewhere in here. But what you can do is just say cross connectivity. Just have to do the right thing here. And this has all these kinds of things for the things I just mentioned. So you can check the bandwidth, and you can check whenever for an event when the connectivity changed. So hey, then you can just say, hey, you're offline. You can't load data. Too bad. All right, so what do we have more? Connectivity plugin refit. Whoa, wrong Hulk. Okay. Akavaching. So this is also a cool library. There's also a alternative for Xamarin at least, which is called Monkey Cache, because this has everything to do with caching. The hard way, what you would do is like you have to, whenever a network request goes out, you have to check, is there data in my cache? You have to check, do you have a network connection? Then you have to go and download the data, save that data to cache, maybe just some invalidated data that was already in there, you have to delete it, replace it with the new one, and then you have to display the data to the user. If you want to do this by hand, this is just a very hard thing to do. But yeah, you would want to do it this way if you want to have cached data in your application. But there is this library for you to help you, which is based on SQLite. And it can do all of the things we just saw in the previous slide in one statement. So that's pretty awesome. It will get the data for you. It will already show the cache data to the user if it has this, and it will do all the hard stuff. And it will be better for your network resiliency. So this is pure a thing for your user experience. So data will come in, it will look like your app is working already, and then the data is updated in the background, and it will be shown to the user like in place, and the user will blink with their eyes, and the data is updated. And also, again, this is not just for Xamarin, I think it's cross-platform also for desktop application, that kind of stuff. You wanted to take a picture? You can, yeah, sure. Full service here, no problem. So there is a couple of hard things still as well in here, especially if you're working with the cross-platform Xamarin stuff. You have this linker optimizer thing that sees if there are any references in your project, and if not, then it will just take out the DLL like, hey, you're not referencing this, so you don't need it. But there doesn't have to be a reference in Xamarin to still use it. So yeah, but if you're going to start using this, know that you have to do something with the linker override, and all the details will be on the GitHub page. It isn't hard. Basically, you just copy one class into your project and it will work. But if you don't, then you will have a hard time figuring out why it doesn't work. And also you have to shut down properly, which is kind of hard, especially on mobile, because when you don't do this, then your data might be corrupted. So then you just shut down the application and the cache that is in there. It will just get new data, so it doesn't really matter. But your data can be corrupted, so if you don't want that and have always the clean, good data in there, then you will have to shut this down, which is kind of hard on mobile because you don't have really life cycle events. You don't get notified whenever, at least not on iOS, there's also differences between platforms. So on iOS, you don't get any notification in your application that the user swiped it up and your application is dead. So you don't have any chance to shut down your cache properly. So you probably want to wrap this into some kind of a repository pattern to just say, hey, whenever you get data, or more importantly, whenever you write data, that you just shut down the cache each time that you have written something to it. Another alternative I already mentioned is the Monkey Cache by James Montemagno. If you've worked with Xamarin, then you probably know this name. And that is a good library as well. You have to do some more manual work there. So let's see how that works. Maybe this is also a good time to inspect what's going on in the HTTP scoop thing. Here you can already see some calls that I just made. So here I went to the details of these superheroes. And whenever I go back here, because this is still the first version, so whenever I reload, you can see each time a call is made. And these are 8 kilobytes, so it's not very much, but it can be megabytes if you want to. And if you're going to fetch that each time, then that's going to be like a waste of money, bandwidth, and all that kind of stuff. We can go in here. We can see what the response time was. Well, in this case, it's not very high. And we can inspect what headers were going over the line and what the response text is. So here you can see a bunch of JSON coming in. And that's what's happening here as well for whenever you go into the details. Now, when I switch over to my version 3, discard, yes. Then this should have the Akavache cache in place. And I'm just, whoops, reload all. I'm just going to quickly update this thing again. I'll make sure I do this on the repository and commit it so that you don't have to when you're looking into this later. And what you can see going on here is Akavache, I think it's still restoring the package, is installed here in my backend service. And you can also choose where to place your cache. So this is in the user account. Of course, because it's cross-platform, this is a bit hard to explain where this exactly is, because on Windows this will probably be your user account folder on the roaming profile, so it will also, and on iOS this will also, but you don't really have access to the file system there, but it will also be on your personal account, and it will also synchronize to iCloud and that kind of stuff. You also have some other options here. If the package is restored, then I can show you. But there, you can also put it in some kind of temp folder, so it will be deleted each time, and there's several options there for you to use. Then what happens? You can see a sample implementation here. It has this nice call, amongst a lot of others, that says get and fetch latest. So what you see happening here is this is the name of the cache that it will be stored in, so you can see this as the name of the table in the database that is going to put the data in. And this is the actual call that it will do to retrieve the data from the remote server or wherever you get your data from. That's what you do here. And this third parameter you can use to invalidate the cache. So what you can do here, you can get an offset and you can validate like, hey, the offset from the previous time, the time now minus the offset and the number of hours between those two. Is it more than 24 hours? If yes, then the cache is expired. Then we are going to assume that there is new data within the past 24 hours, and it will get new data then and show that to the user. What actually happens here is that it will, if there is already data in this cache, then it will show that to the user immediately, and it will go through this again, and whenever this is, it will always fetch the data from the remote server, but whenever the cache is expired, then it will come through here a second time, and then it will actually show it to the user. And what you see happening here, this was just the one line that was here before. So basically this whole caching thing is wrapped around this one line, or whatever logic you might have to retrieve your data. So now what should be able to happen here is to run this on the iOS simulator, which can take a bit of time, so I'll just keep talking. Here we go. Also, here, this is basically the thing. You can combine all these things into a very resilient application, because what you can see happening here is the connectivity thing, because if we're not connected, then yeah, we can expire the cache, but we won't be able to get new data. So whenever we are not connected, then we simply return false, and we're not going to even try to get the data from remote, because we know that's not going to work. So the application should have loaded, and if I put this next to it and clear it for now, then you should probably see it coming in. Oh no, it already came in once, so now it's cached, and now whenever I reload it here, then it doesn't go over there again, and I open this for the first time. I probably got the whole thing all together. Here we go. The comics is a separate call, so it got that now once, and now it should be cached. And so let's move on. I don't know what happened here. Oops. No Spotify. So let's see if I can just prove my point. Nope, I can't. Okay, bye-bye. So normally you would not see the same call again like you would see on reloading the list, and because it's cached. So then the last thing that we still need to do is whenever we have failed requests, so with the HTTP 500 or the 404, or yeah, you know all the HTTP codes by heart, of course. And if you have to put all these mechanisms in there to take it into account yourself, then that again is a hard thing to do. But it's very important to do, because what you see happening a lot is, at least I did this, is whenever an error happened, you would just show an alert to the user, hey, something bad happened, please try again. But the user has no idea, does it even make sense to try again? Can I try again? What's going on in the background? You don't know. So you as the developer can make a much better decision on can we try this request again based on the HTTP status code that we get back. Because if we get a 404 back from the server, then yeah, you don't know. You know that it's not going to make much sense to retry the request again, because probably that endpoint is just gone for some reason, and it doesn't make much sense. But if it's an internal server error, then it might recover over time. So you might want to retry it once, twice, or 3 times, and maybe it comes back up, and then you can continue like you would normally. There's a couple of strategies to do this, and a library that makes it very easy for you is Polly, derived from policies, and it will help you to define policies for failed requests or failed whatevers. And it's not just for Xamarin, you can use it in other applications as well. And here you can see this very, very bad slide with a lot of text on it. But there's a couple of policies like retry. So this is basically what I said. If a request fails, then you might want to retry again based on some conditions. There's also a circuit breaker, so you can, yeah, you know, from the fuse things in your house. Whenever there's a short circuit, then you can just say, okay, stop doing this. It's going to hurt. You can also have a timeout. So you can just wait for a couple of seconds, minutes, hours, I don't know, whatever you want. But then at that point, you know, like, hey, if I'm going to wait for 5 seconds for this call to complete and it's not there after 5 seconds, then yeah, it's not going to happen. So just stop there. And there's also a fallback. It's also a really nice one. So whenever a request fails, then you can fall back to a certain value. So if you know you're going to get a list of superheroes and the request fails, then you can fall back to the cached list of superheroes, for instance. So you can use that for a fallback scenario and still show something useful to your user. Let's quickly show you this, because there's a much more fun thing that I want to show you. Discard again. Go to version 4. Yes. Reload all the things. And here we have a Polly. Again, this wraps basically around the, oh, I didn't put the caching in here, but well, it's separated because what happens here is get comics from superhero remote. So you see here the caching is happening, and then it has this call for fetching the data remotely. And within that call, I will use this policy thing, and you can specify certain conditions, what you see happening on this line, and you can say, okay, I want to handle an API exception. I know an API exception happens whenever a request fails in my code, and whenever that exception status code not is a 404. Like I said, if it's a 404, you can retry it or do whatever you want then. But in this case, I know if it's a 404, then yeah, the endpoint isn't there and there's not much chance of recovery. So whenever it's anything else than a 404, and of course, whenever this exception happens, so this exception doesn't happen when it's an HTTP 200, of course, then we're going to wait and retry. There's also the fallback and whatever that, see the circuit breaker, the fallback, all the options that I mentioned earlier. But I am going to retry it here. And I'm going to say I'm going to retry it at a maximum of 3 times. And there's also, you can also put a little sleep between them. So I use the math.power here. So it will, with each attempt, it will add, or it will go to the power of 2, so it will also wait each time a little bit longer before it retries again, so that we don't DDoS the server when yeah, I mean, you can imagine when Facebook or something has a disruption, then and people are going to retry, then the retries itself are going to yeah, make the network even worse. So with this, you could put some time between it so you don't DDoS the server by accident. And then you also have an event that whenever a retry is going to happen, you can do something. And in this case, I'm just going to write a little console message so you can see that a retry is happening, because ideally for the user experience, you don't want to see anything happening. You just want to see it retry and get the new data in. And here, this is what's actually going to be executed. So here is the actual call to the server that is going to get the new data. I should have updated this package again. It's going to be a challenge in these next few minutes. So what we're going to see happening now, if all goes well, is, as you remember in the backend for ID2, so for the Hulk, there should be an error in there. And here you can see trying to fetch remote data in the output. So this is this call here, and it's going to get the data from the actual remote server. But there should be some kind of random chance that we are going to get an error here. And of course, you will now see that it doesn't happen. Suddenly, our network magically works brilliantly. Oh, reset by peer. Oh, that's also cool. Come on. Okay. Once more. This is it. Here we go. No. Okay. Well, what you could see happening here is that a error shows up. So an HTTP 500. This is 3. How does that happen? It doesn't put it in order or something. And here's this one again. Okay. Sorry for this, guys. Gonna try once more. Okay, here we go. But now we don't see the console output, so that sucks. All right, well, I'm going to combine the last demo and this one together. So let's see if we can get in here. Trying to fetch remote data, good. Okay, this is number 2, so we've got the right one now. Here, something went wrong. Status doesn't indicate 500 internal server error, and it's going to retry 3 times automatically. You can see that, and it doesn't go right after 3 times. What are the odds? And then it just stops. Or it will, no, sorry, it doesn't just stop. It will throw another exception. So you can do then another exception handling. And in this case, I'm just going to say another alert and say something bad happened. So this is the really whenever there's no recovery possible. But normally it would do just go once, go twice, and then trying to fetch remote data, and now the remote data came in successfully. So now you can just return to everything to normal. If we look at this request in a little bit more detail, like I said, the last demo really quickly, you can see this e tag header in here, which is basically a hash. It can be SHA1 or MD5 or whatever you want, because it's not encrypted or whatsoever, so it's not secure, but it's a hash of something that makes this object unique. And then whenever you do this, you can do the request header, which is not in here right now because I have to go to the last version. I still have a couple of minutes, so I can do that. And what you can do with that is compare that hash at the server side, so that whenever you send this hash, the server will decide if there is any new data, yes or no. And then only when there's new data, it will send that back to you. So that way, you will save bandwidth. Oh, this was still running, that's cool. You will save bandwidth because you will only save that extra hash, and the server will then determine for you whether or not there's new data, and it won't send the data again if you already have the latest version. So let's quickly take the slides for that. So this is called HTTP conditional requests, so you can specify certain conditions which triggers or does not trigger a response to you. It's all explained here. And it only returns data if something changed. And you can have these conditions with if match, if non-match, or if modified since. So you can also send a date timestamp over and see if it's modified since that time. So you would have some kind of flag in your database that the data has changed at this time. And it's actually a very easy form of caching. So let's quickly dive into it. Quickly. What you can easily do with .NET Core applications, so this is the server side, is create a middleware for it. So you don't have to do anything on your objects or that kind of stuff. You can just say, okay, whenever a request goes out and we support the A tag, we are going to calculate a hash for it, and we're going to add an extra header to this request. And also, whenever something comes back in, then you are going to see like, hey, do I have this header? And if yes, then we're going to see if we already have this this data, yes or no. And then from your app, of course, you will have to also calculate this this hash. So I've created a custom implementation of my HTTP header, and what this does is add for each request, it calculates the checksum, and it will add it to the request. So if we run this, you will see that with the outgoing request, we will send this e tag header, or well, it will be the if non-match probably. Let's clear these. So if I go in here, then you will see this one. And we can see the e tag here. And whenever I do this now, something bad happens. Oh my God, this is so bad. All right, this is not working as intended. Well, you send the e tag value with your request, which basically contains the hash of whatever you try to reach. If you have got it before, of course. If you never got the object before, then it won't be able to send out the header. And yeah, then you will just will receive data only whenever it's updated. So that way you save bandwidth. So the takeaways of this session: write less redundant code by using a library like Refit. You have to think about error handling, recovery scenarios. You can do that easily with Polly, and think about caching your data, and this library can be used for that. Keep in mind the limitations of a mobile device, or well, any device you're developing for. And yeah, it's all about user experience. If there's, for some reason, you can't make it perform really well, then just show something spinning or loading on the screen, and the user will think that something is going on, and that will take away a lot of frustration as well. And there's a lot of more optimizations possible with the HTTP request, the HTTP conditional requests. What's going on here? Okay, and here is a bunch of links. These are also in the GitHub repository. Yeah, go read up on this stuff. There's also more in the book that I showed you earlier that I have written with my good friend. And so yeah, check that out. Maybe you won some with the tweet messages. I'm going to check them right away after this session. And thank you very much for having me, and have a great rest of the conference. I'll be walking around here today, tomorrow, Saturday, so if you find me somewhere stumbling around Moscow and you have any questions, just ask.